Adoptions Manager. Oh, thank you. Well received. I hope you feel that way at the end of the presentation. So I work for the Maryland Department of Human Services, the Social Services Administration, and that's our child welfare organization in Maryland. Today I'm going to be presenting on using implementation science to conduct a needs assessment survey regarding pre- and post-adoption services in Maryland. So my PICO. So I had this wonderful idea that if Maryland's adoption first and then the rest of the child welfare workforce received this wonderful adoption competency training that we've heard throughout the last couple of days, the national trauma training through CASE, would this better inform and allow our child welfare staff to be adoption competent, receive additional technical assistance from the central office? Would they become more competent adoption and child welfare workers in providing not only adoption, pre- and post-adoption services, but also utilizing the funding that we receive from the federal government to ensure those services are continued and sustained pre- and post-finalization? Is everybody with me so far?
Yes.
Okay, great. So, using implementation science, first you want to start with your methodology. What is it really that I want to do? So I said, I have to assess exploration, which is the first stage, is I have to assess where the child welfare workforce is. Well, since this is about pre- and post-adoption services, let's go to the source and assess the adoption workers. But let's start from the top down. So let's assess the people that should know what they're doing in order to train the people that's doing the work. So let's assess the leaders, the administrators. In Maryland, we have 24 jurisdictions. 23 of them are counties and one is a city. Baltimore City is the metropolitan area, the big metropolitan county. So we have 24 adoption administrators and 24 adoption staff. So that's, let me slow down. We have 24 adoption supervisors and 24 adoption administrators. So in all, we have 48 people. So I sent that survey out to all 48. I received responses. I analyzed the data. I conducted a webinar to further assess. I know what you said on the survey, but let's do a webinar to actually hear if what you were saying correlated, and let's further explore what the true needs are amongst your peers in order to analyze and further assess where we're going and what the central office needs to do. So after that, I conducted the webinar, then I conducted a post-survey to see, now that the central office has provided this preliminary TA or technical assistance, how are they feeling now about the work? And then I began the installation phase. In implementation science, you'll see here, there's 4 stages. You have exploration. The second one is installation. Then you have initial implementation, and then you have your full-fledged, full-blown implementation. So, exploration phase, the first phase. So, this is my webinar, guys. The webinar objectives was to review the statewide data, to review and discuss the survey results, to discuss the local departments and determine their needs, what they felt their needs were because they were doing the work, discuss what services are currently available, what services they felt like were needed in order to be successful, and the action steps. So, who are Maryland's youth? In Maryland, what do we look like? We're very data-driven. A lot of people are afraid of data, the child welfare workforce, but data drives decisions. Data drives what we do, how we do it. How are we going to know where we're going if we don't know where we're coming from? And in Maryland, we love trend lines, and you'll see that in a moment as well. So I started off with the state fiscal year of 2018, total number of youth served, about 4,700 kids. So that was equivalent to like 3,500 kids a month we served. Total number of permanency outcomes, 373 adoptions, 23 were older youth. In Maryland, older youth is defined by youth ages 14 and older. So that means about 350 of those youth were ages 0 to 13. So that's a big number. I want you to keep that in mind. So 438 youth received custody and guardianship, 76 were older youth, and about 362 were ages 0 to 13. So from that number, I can tell you off the top, we do really good at reunifying kids, adopting kids, and providing permanence to custody and guardianship. So you would think, but I never gave you, I never drilled down on the data, and I'll get to that part. We do really well. So who's Maryland's youth currently? 412 youth still in that same fiscal year had a permanency plan of adoption. That means throughout their time in foster care, the plan changed to adoption at some point along the continuum. 408 were legally free and eligible for adoption. This means that those 408 were TPR, termination of parental rights, were achieved, but the plan may not have yet been adoption. 220 were legally free with a plan of adoption. This means TPR was achieved, the plan is adoption. Keep that in mind, 220. So why was only 34 youth residing in adoptive, pre-finalized adoptive homes? Why? So anecdotally, I could assume a lot of things, looking at the data coming from the central office, talking to peers, going into our child welfare system, but I wanted to go straight to the source. So, I'm gonna give you a little history lesson. In 1997, they established the Adoptions and Safe Families Act. So this meant that children were lingering in care, and the regulations, the federal government established that children need to have timely permanency. And that timely permanency meant that they needed to achieve permanency within 24 months with less moves in care. The representation on this table shows the amount of moves per 1,000 days in care. So you can see my trend line from 2015 to 2019. Maryland had some challenges. In 2018, we went up, but we're dipping back down in the first 2 or 3 quarters of 2019. So I wanted to show that. I wanted to show that to the workforce, because you gotta know why you're doing the work that you do. You have to be able to correlate why placement stability is so important in trying to achieve timely permanence for youth. The longer youth remain in care, and the more moves, the more placement instability a child makes, the more detrimental it is for that child. The more trauma, every move is a trauma, the more stress, and the longer it takes for a child to achieve permanency, So, there's my pie chart. So, children in care 2+ years at the start of 2018. Who exited to permanency in 12 months? Adoption, 57.4%. Reunification, 17.2%. Guardianship, 17.2%. Would you say that Maryland was doing well? So I told you the Adoption and Safe Families Act said that children should receive timely permanency in 24 months. This pie chart is reflective of that in less than 12 months. Yay, Maryland. Thank you. So let's get to the needs assessment survey. I told you this before. 48 people were asked to participate in the webinar. 19 of the 24 jurisdictions actually completed the webinar, and 33 responses were received. regarding my pre-assessment survey. So as Heather said, I said, Sherilyn, that's only 79, Sherilyn, that's only 79%. She said, that's good. I said, no, they all need to take it. I'm ready to call them up and say, what's going on here? So I digressed. I got back in the saddle. So let's look at what the local departments felt their needs were. 76%, I'll average it out, felt like a resource hotline was needed pre-adoption. So they just felt like they needed a resource hotline for people who were interested in adoption to just call and give them all the information that they needed. And I said to myself, is that not what the caseworkers should be doing anyway? Okay. So 79% felt like they would benefit from a post-adoption navigator. So I said, okay, I can get that, So that's after finalization, navigating the system, mental health resources, education, financial resources. 27.7% felt like their post-guardianship support groups are unmet need. Now we're getting something. 46%, we need a post-adoption guardianship resource hotline. So less people thought that the hotline was needed for post-guardianship. More people felt like the resource was needed pre-adoption and guardianship. You following me? Okay. 61%, they need TA from the central office. I said, that's me. So on the webinar, they decided that some additional recurring things was need for respite services, more trauma-informed services, and the need for in-home prevention and adoption disruption. That's fair. So, as we went throughout the survey, 15.4% stated NA as a reason to not photo list. I said, 46% of you said that they actually utilize Adopt Us kids. Maryland has a policy that you have to profile your youth on Adopt Us kids. Only 46% of my child welfare workforce felt like they did it. But 15% said, I don't know if this is needed or not sure. So I have a challenge here, right, in adoption competency. 79% felt like we needed pre-finalization supports, and 50% felt like we needed post-finalization supports. So, what is needed to achieve permanency? Still in exploration, I assessed adoption assistance training was clearly needed throughout the state of Maryland. Policy refreshers, because we do have them, 13-1 to be specific. Practice, dispelling adoption myths. On the webinar, I heard a lot of workers saying we're unable to find permanency for older youth. In Maryland, the age of consent is 10. Yes. So at 10, Brittany, do you think that you were really able to make that decision? At 10, guys. So adoption assistance services are needed, available resources, available supports, orders of respite supports available throughout the state, but a true understanding of the level of commitment it takes to be a forever permanent resource to a family. So many families have no idea the impact of how this decision is going to change not only the youth's life, but their lives as well. So the question became, do we do a good job at educating families about what they're about to face? I believe that we say, hey, welcome, we have youth, please adopt. And we adopt very well. But do we equip the families with the competency and the skills and the tools that they need to sustain the relationship and the family. Thank you. So, what would this project be without talking about disproportionality? So let's review the data. So I'm just going to focus on Maryland specifically. In Maryland, youth can stay in foster care up until age 21. It may be different in some states. So we have about 1.6 million total youth in Maryland. 518,000 Black, 711 white, 232 Hispanic, and 114 all others. All others could be Asian. We have 1-2% Native American, and then some people identify as other races. So, the ethnicity of youth in care. If you look at that chart, that blue is Black youth in care. I don't need to say anything further. The red is white, and the green is Hispanic. The trend line is the last 4 years. Clearly, we can see that we have a disproportionality in the state of Maryland, correct? The question now becomes, is there a disparity? So let's look at it further. The median length of stay of long stayers or children who have lengthy stays in care who exited this year by March 31st. So N represents the number of youth that are in care. Let me see if I can get this right without changing the slide. Yeah, I did it. So N represents the number of youth in care, and that number under there represents the number of days in care. From 2014 to 2017, you can see clearly blue is the Black youth in care. That the longer Black youth stay in care, the longer it takes to achieve permanency. So there's your outcome. Adoption counts by race. I drilled it down even further for those who didn't catch it the first time. So, Black children are in the blue. Black represents 2016, red is 2017, and green is 2018. So clearly we can see the number of Black youth we have in comparison to the number of white youth that's being adopted. So population, more Black youth. Population of youth in care, more white youth are being adopted. Everybody see that? Disparity, disproportionality at its finest. All right, so what are some potential barriers to adoption? We had that discussion. Difficult conversations for the worker and the youth. To be honest, guys, some people are not comfortable with having the discussion about adoption. And Lord knows, don't talk about negotiation of the adoption subsidy. You're going somewhere else when you start talking about that, right? The youth ambivalence towards the adoption, relatives adoptions. Our guardianship numbers are higher than our adoption numbers for that specific reason. So breaking through those barriers with relatives, cultural competence, the impact of trauma, and how grief and loss correlates and impacts attachment and the readiness to permanency. So the second phase is installation. Let's get some work done. Let's start going in and doing some things and shaking it up, being change agents and making some things happen. So in July, I conducted the Adoption Competency webinar. The webinar discussed post-adoption assistance, the local department needs, their assessment, ways to access financial supports from adoption assistance federal funding. Yes, we do receive funds to aid in adoption assistance. The local department said, really? That just wasn't back in 2002? No. It's every year. We have post-adoption assistance funding. We have guardianship incentive funding. Please come to me. I have the money, whatever you need to prevent the disruption, to sustain the family, to achieve the permanency. The money is here. I'm tracking it. I know you guys, despite the emails that I send, despite the phone calls that I make, you guys are not utilizing this money. Why? So, the discussion of how the funds are utilized, how I track the funding, how the funds are processed, and the verification of receipt. Yes, I will want to know, did you actually use the money and what the outcome was? Yes, thank you, I would like to know that. Our federal partners would also like to know that. All right, so action steps to be taken by the state and the results thereof. Ensure child welfare workforce is not only competent in the area of adoption assistance and readiness for permanency, but also culturally competent. To ensure that trainings are centered around racial and ethnic diversity. I can tell you, when I put those 4 slides up, you could hear a pin drop. No one had a comment, no one made a statement. So I don't know if it was that they were just uncomfortable with the topic of race, or if that no one had ever given them the numbers where they could visually see it and they were processing the information. But if you know me, you know another webinar is coming. So, making efforts to include agency partners and stakeholders. I'm so glad to see our agency partners in the room already. So I'm glad you guys are being able to look at this, because I'll be coming for your attention. Thank you very much. That was a plug, Rebecca. And to ensure Maryland's foster care youth who are legally free and eligible for adoption exit care timely, not just exit care, but exit care timely. Yes, we do have goals. We have data-driven goals, and we will be using accounts-based, am I saying that right? Accounts-based accountability, results-based accountability to make sure that those outcomes are achieved. Because I believe that people need to see what they're doing. I believe that you should have change agents, that people should be rewarded for the work that they do. And I think that means something. And a timely, excellent care with a timely, permanent resource. So I did a retrospective survey, which was more, Sherilyn helped me find out it was a post-assessment survey and not really a retrospective survey. So out of the 48 adoption administrators and supervisory staff, 24 registered for the webinar, 16 participated, 13 completed the post-assessment survey, which gave me a 54% completion rate. I was not mad at that, because my number of participation on the survey was greater. So you heard the implementation, and that's what I wanted to achieve. 89% of the participants felt like they had some sense of what their local department and statewide adoption data was. 75% felt like they had knowledge of the correlation between placement stability and placements, and 62% said that they had previous knowledge of what the barriers to adoption was. The continuation of the results, 67% desired future learning collaboratives. Well, boy, are they gonna get it. 47% data was useful in the permanency planning of youth. So we're halfway there. 62% felt they had prior knowledge of adoption and guardianship barriers. 85% agreed to share the data with colleagues. So that's good, because I'm talking to supervisors and administrators. They should be able to share the data with their staff and their colleagues. 69% understood the webinar content, so that's good. 70%, they felt like I had knowledge on the topic. I'm okay with that. There's always room for improvement, right? So the initial implementation. So what we are going to do, the initiatives that we have, is to increase their knowledge on the post-adoption and guardianship incentive funding. We need to incentivize the adoptions. A lot of the barriers are financial barriers. How housing barriers, educational barriers, those barriers that Heather talked about not knowing if a youth is eligible for some type of tuition or college assistance. What can you use? Well, the policy says that you can use it pre-finalization. You can also use it post-finalization. You can use it to incentivize the adoption. A lot of workers do not know this, or they understood it to be a one-time federal funding, and it's not true. Adoption savings funding. Maryland has adoption savings funding that we're planning on utilizing to ensure that adoption, let me explain this. How much time do I have?
You're fine.
Okay.
You're fine.
So, thank you. So adoption savings funding is the federal government. They're so nice, guys. So they give, am I representing? Okay. They actually give you money for achieving adoption finalizations. So we get money back. Did you know that? Yes, the feds, they do that. Thank you. I think as a manager, and especially at the central office or the state level, you have to be able to understand the funding streams. And I remember Rebecca did an example with us. She used people like us for us to understand 4B, 4E funding, because we were like, what? Like we had no idea. And if you don't know how these funding streams are coming down and how to allocate the resources, you won't be able to make planful decisions with your local departments. So I told them, worry less about the money and more about the goals and outcomes and what you want to do. Send me your plan, let's talk about it, let's tweak it, and then I'll take care of the money part. So once you know that you have the money, then everything else is easier. And Rebecca is a really big advocate for achieving timely permanency and for having, what do you say all the time? Successful, lasting connections. Having lasting connections. So now that we enter Family First, if you guys know about Family First legislation, traditionally these funds were only able to be accessed if a youth was in care. So they were used for children out of home. Now with Family First, we have some wiggle room and we're able to use those same funds on the prevention side so that we can prevent youth from coming into care. So that's a great thing, because if we can close the front door, then we'll have more resources for sustainability of those youth that exit through the back door, and our recidivism or reentry rate will be non-existent, hopefully. 1%, maybe 1%, that's not, that's just 1%. So we want to increase the efforts in recruitment and retention of resources for parents who are willing to be adoptive resources in Maryland. When you come through the door, you're eligible to foster and adopt. So you can do both. There is not a different track for different people. The local departments do have the right to say what their current need is, but we strictly follow COMAR. Parents do have a right to appeal decisions. So we are binding on regulations, and so we want to make sure that all our policies and procedures have those compliances in them. So institute statewide recruitment campaign for resource parents through our partners, strengthen Maryland's Resource Parent Association in efforts to provide additional knowledge to existing resource parents. And we're opening up that to actually having resource parents work more closely with birth parents. Thank you. So, in closing, what I gained from the Minority Professional Leadership Development, I always have to look here because I always say it wrong. Thank you. My fellow adoption colleagues, to be honest, adoption is my baby. I've been in the state service for 22 years, and adoption was like the last and only program that I had not done. And Rebecca gave me the opportunity a couple of years, and I thank you for it. And she said to me, but I dream bigger for you. I want you to know your statewide colleagues. And I was like, statewide colleagues? And she said, yeah, other adoption managers. And I met Deborah. And I was like, oh, Deborah, the adoption managers. I was like, wait, now I'll be able to get out of the office. So thank you so much for this opportunity to get out of the office, right? So wealth of knowledge and adoption assistance, and I'm sorry, and Kelly, I'm sorry, Kelly. Wealth of knowledge and adoption assistance, sound coaching and advice. It's kind of hard when your executive director is your mentor. But I have to say, Rebecca availed herself to me on weekends, outside of work, at night. And when I tell you I'm standing on the shoulder of a giant, I am sweating. But I think that's how we grow, in our anxiety and in our stress. That's how we grow. And she believed in me. And I know that this is a personal passion for you, so I hope that I am doing you good justice and doing you well. And I love you for it. I'm not going to cry. And then, that's because I am a crier. And the transference of learning. To be able to impart the knowledge and the skills that I've learned through the leadership program to my staff and to my colleagues. It was very important for me to understand the budget and the funding streams. So I sat in front of the room. Like, I want to know, how do we get this money? Because if I don't know it, I can't impart the knowledge and interpret it to my staff. And I'm looking like, I don't know, And they're looking at me like, well, why don't you know? So, and this quote Rebecca gave to me, and it's in my office. She literally called me up. I had resource homes and I had placement services. And she said, I'm combining it, and oh yeah, you're getting adoptions too. I said, that's 3 programs. She said, yeah, but it's all resources. They all provide permanency to you. I said, what options do I have? Like, I'm a state employee, I got options. And she looked at me and she kindly said, this is the direction that I'm going with the agency. So I'm smart. Now, the Lord says so you either do it or you find, or you be an active participant in your own rescue. She didn't say that. That's what I said to her. But then the next day, so all that weekend, I was like, oh my God, I've never served. It's the pleasure of, understand where I'm coming from. I'm being very transparent. I've never served at the pleasure of, that means she can call me in her office and say, your service is no longer needed. What am I going to do? So I called my sister up and she said, well, you have your degree, right? I said, yeah. She said, you have your license, right? I said, yeah. She said, you know what you're doing, right? She said, yeah. She said, I don't think you have a problem. I said, oh, okay. And that was almost 4 years ago, and I'm still saying that. She gave me this quote by the president of Liberia, Ellen Johnson Sirleaf. I hope I'm saying her last name right. The size of your dreams must always exceed your current capacity to achieve them. And that just resonated with me. And every time I get stuck, because anybody who knows Rebecca, we are doing like 5 things at different times. And I just go in my office after having a cuss fest, and I look at that quote. And I get up and I do it every day. And to be honest with you, now the work is, and I don't want to say this in front of my new deputy either, but now the work is fairly easy to me. It's still challenging, and I want you to know the difference between easy and challenging. So it's easy, meaning I can do it, I feel I have the capacity to do the work. But it is challenging, but in my challenge is when I grow. So she would sit in board meetings, move your hand from your chin, sit up straight, and I feel like this lady, but she has really grown me. So I just want to, because professionalism is not just the work, right? It's your decorum, the way you act, the way that you behave, the way that you represent your states in a room with children's bedroom. So I just wanted to take this opportunity. This is not, I don't take this lightly at all, guys, and I appreciate you. I hope that we can stick together and sustain one another and be a support system to one another, and we're all going to do well. Thank you.